SEAL Captain demanded black woman give him her code name in a bar. He threw his drink at her and made her freeze. The cold beer ran down Diana Washington's face as the golden liquid stained her white blouse. The silence in the Warrior's Den, the bar frequented exclusively by elite military personnel in Norfolk, Virginia, was deafening. "Oops, sorry there, princess," laughed Captain Bradley Morrison, his muscles straining under his Navy SEAL's t-shirt as his teammates burst out laughing. "I thought you were one of the waitresses. This isn't exactly the kind of place for people like you." Diana was 34 years old and had spent the last 8 working as a trauma nurse at the Norfolk Naval Hospital. She never imagined that a simple stop for a drink after a 16-hour shift would end with her being publicly humiliated by someone she was supposed to protect and serve. Slowly, she picked up napkins from the table and began to dry her face, her calm, deliberate movements contrasting with the growing tension in the room. "What's your code name, sweetheart?" Bradley continued, leaning over her table with a cruel smile. "Everyone who comes here has one. Soldiers, sailors, Marines. Or are you just another lost civilian who wandered into the wrong place?" The other SEALs around the table laughed louder, some raising their phones to record the situation. The bartender, a retired veteran, hesitated for a moment but decided not to intervene. After all, Bradley Morrison was a war hero with 3 Bronze Stars and commanded the respect of the entire base. Diana finished drying herself and placed the dirty napkins on the table with almost surgical precision. Her brown eyes met Bradley's without blinking, and something in the intensity of that gaze made his smile falter for a split second. "Do you really want to know my code name?" she asked, her voice low but carrying a strange authority that cut through the laughter like a blade. Bradley regained his composure, slamming his fist on the table. "Of course I do. Let's hear this fantasy." "Let me guess. Nurse. Lost little girl. Or maybe poor little thing." The crowd of military personnel who had gathered to watch the spectacle roared in approval. Some whispered bets about when the woman would run out in tears. Phones continued to record, capturing every second of the humiliation to share on social media later. Diana rose slowly, her 5 feet 7 inches stature seeming to grow as she straightened up. For a moment, something changed in her posture, her shoulders aligned in a specific way, her weight distributed on her feet like someone ready for combat, and her eyes took on the calculating coldness of a predator assessing its prey. "My code name," she said, allowing a ghostly smile to play at the corners of her mouth, "is Ghost." The word hung in the air like gunpowder smoke. Some of the older veterans in the bar stopped drinking, a primitive recognition beginning to form in their minds. That name meant something. Something important. Bradley, however, was too busy with his own arrogance to notice the signs. "Phantom," he laughed. "How creative. Let me guess, you disappear when the going gets tough." Diana didn't respond immediately. Instead, her eyes scanned the bar, cataloging every exit, every potential weapon, every person who could be a threat or an ally. It was an old habit, developed in places where the difference between life and death came down to seconds of preparation. When she finally spoke, her voice cut through the noise like a deadly whisper. "No, Captain Morrison. I make others disappear." Something in the way she pronounced his name, with intimate knowledge of who he was, even though he had never introduced himself, made Bradley hesitate. How did she know his full name? And why did he suddenly feel like he had made a terrible mistake? The atmosphere in the bar had changed subtly. The more experienced veterans began whispering among themselves, fragments of memories and military urban legends beginning to connect. The name Ghost echoed in their minds like an alarm bell. If you're enjoying this story of justice and don't want to miss any details of how this humiliation will turn into the biggest lesson in humility this arrogant captain has ever received, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because Bradley Morrison had just discovered that not all ghosts are just legends, and some of them are much closer than you might think. Bradley's laughter echoed through the bar like the roar of a territorial animal, but something in the silence that followed should have been a warning. The more experienced veterans had stopped laughing, their faces now wearing an expression that mixed recognition and growing terror. "Ghost," Bradley repeated, wiping tears of laughter from his eyes. "Let me guess, you watched too many war movies and decided to create a soldier identity to impress the real men?" He turned to his fellow SEALs, seeking approval. "Guys, we've got a wannabe here. He's probably never even held a gun in his life, let alone served his country." Diana remained motionless, but something changed in her eyes. For a split second, The bar environment disappeared and she was back in the suffocating heat of Afghanistan, the smell of gunpowder and blood filling her nostrils, the weight of a sniper rifle in her hands as she protected the evacuation of civilians from a bombed hospital. "You know what I think?" Bradley continued, encouraged by her silence. "I think you're just another little nurse who wants to feel special. You probably don't even know the difference between an M4 and an AK-47. Thomas Mitchell, a 58-year-old veteran sitting in the corner of the bar, dropped his glass. The glass shattered on the floor, but he didn't even notice. His eyes were fixed on Diana, his mind processing connections that filled him with horror. He had served in the 75th Ranger Regiment and knew stories whispered in secure rooms about an operator who shouldn't officially exist. "Bradley," Thomas tried to interrupt, his voice trembling, "maybe you should." "Shut up, old man," Bradley cut him off, still focused on his public humiliation of Diana. "I'm giving our fantasist here a reality check." Diana closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, Bradley should have seen the danger. There was the look of someone who had made life-and-death decisions in fractions of a second, who had seen colleagues die in his arms, who had carried the weight of 47 confirmed deaths in operations that would never appear in any official report. "You want proof?" Bradley asked, pulling out his phone. "I'm going to post this on Instagram. Let's see how many likes we get with civilian nurse pretends to be soldier in military bar. I'm sure my followers will love to see someone trying to steal value from real heroes." He started recording, pointing the camera directly at Diana. "Guys, look what we have here. A civilian who thinks she can walk into a military bar and pretend to be an operator. Say hi to Ghost," he made air quotes mockingly. That's when Diana smiled. It wasn't a pleasant or nervous smile. It was the icy smile of a predator who had just decided that the game had gone on long enough. "Operation Red Shadow," she said softly, but her voice cut through the noise like a blade. March 15, 2019. Helmand Province. 4 operators killed, 12 wounded. Medical evacuation under hostile fire. Bradley's phone vibrated in his hand. That operation was classified. Few outside the elite units knew the specific details. "Impossible," muttered Jake Peterson, another SEAL at the table. "How did she?" "Because I was there," Diana interrupted, her voice now carrying the cold authority of someone accustomed to giving orders in life-or-death situations. 96 minutes of continuous fire. 14 targets eliminated to keep the landing zone secure while you evacuated your wounded. Thomas Mitchell was now standing, his face pale as paper. "My God," he whispered, "you're the ghost of Helmand. The ghost sniper. I thought you were an urban legend." Bradley's arrogant smile began to melt like wax in the sun. He looked around the bar, noticing for the first time that the veterans were staring at him not with admiration, but with something close to horror at his ignorance. "That's impossible," he insisted, but his voice had lost its previous conviction. "Women don't serve in special combat units. There are no female snipers in classified operations." Diana walked slowly toward his table, each step deliberate and predatory. When she was only a meter away, she held out her hand. "Give me your phone." "What? Why should I?" "Give it to me." "The phone." The authority in her voice was absolute. Bradley, not understanding why, found himself handing over the device. Diana quickly typed something and returned the phone. "Call this number," she commanded. "Ask about Ghost. Ask about Helmand. Ask how many of your own SEAL teammates owe their lives to a woman who officially never existed." Bradley stared at the screen. It was a number with a pentagon prefix. "I'm not going to." "Captain Morrison." The voice came from the bar entrance. Colonel David Richards, commander of the naval base, stood in the doorway with 2 military intelligence officers. His face was grave as a tombstone. "Colonel." Bradley choked, his arrogance evaporating instantly. "Sir, I didn't know you were." "You have 3 seconds to stop recording and delete everything you filmed," Richards interrupted, his eyes alternating between Bradley's phone and Diana. "And then you're going to apologize to the Master Chief." "Master Chief?" Bradley looked confused. "Sir, she's just a civilian nurse." Master Chief Diana Washington, Richards continued, awarded 3 silver stars, 2 bronze stars, and a Medal of Honor that remains classified because the operation that officially earned it never happened. The silence in the bar was deafening. Bradley looked at Diana as if he were seeing her for the first time, really seeing her. Now he could notice the almost imperceptible scars on her hands, the way she always positioned herself with a clear escape route, the supernatural calm he had thought was weakness. She saved more American lives in 5 years of classified service than you will save in your entire career, Richards added. And now she works saving lives as a nurse because that's her choice, not because it's all she can do. Each new humiliation only strengthened something inside Diana that her oppressors couldn't see, a quiet strength fueled by the very injustice they tried to impose. What those privileged men didn't know was that each act of contempt was writing their own sentence of defeat, because when you humiliate someone who has already faced hell and survived to save others, you're not attacking a victim, you're awakening a ghost who had chosen to rest, but who never forgot how to hunt. Diana remained motionless for a few seconds after Colonel Richards' revelation, allowing the magnitude of Bradley's embarrassment to fully sink in. The bar had turned into a silent theater where every veteran present processed what they had just witnessed, the public humiliation of one of the most arrogant SEALs on the base by someone they had assumed to be a mere nurse. "Colonel," Diana said finally, her voice maintaining the professional calm she had developed over years of saving lives under extreme pressure, "I appreciate the intervention, but it's not necessary." Bradley, still holding the phone with trembling hands, tried to regain some control over the situation. "Listen, I didn't know who you were. If I had known." "If you had known, you wouldn't have spilled beer on me?" Diana interrupted, tilting her head slightly. "Or if you had known, would you have treated the simple nurse with the same disrespect, but more carefully so as not to get caught?" The question cut through Bradley's pathetic attempt at apology. Several SEALs around the table lowered their eyes, recognizing the brutal truth in those words. Their respect was not for Diana as a person, but for her medals and military rank. That's not fair," Bradley muttered, but his voice lacked any conviction. Thomas Mitchell, the veteran who had recognized Diana first, slowly approached the table. "Captain Morrison," he said, his voice laden with decades of military experience, "you have just learned a lesson that should have been taught long ago. Respect is not based on uniforms or medals. It is based on character." Diana watched the interaction with growing interest. Thomas wasn't just a casual observer. There was something in his eyes that suggested deeper knowledge of classified operations. "Thomas Mitchell," he introduced himself formally to Diana, 75th Ranger Regiment, retired. "I served as communications coordinator on several operations in Afghanistan between 2017 and 2020. Recognition was immediate in Diana's eyes. "Night Bird," she said, using the code name that only operators of certain classified missions would know. "Exactly," Thomas confirmed, a respectful smile crossing his face. "You saved my nephew in Operation Red Shadow." Kevin Mitchell, combat medic. "He told me that a ghost sniper had created a safe evacuation corridor that allowed the wounded to be removed." The connection between the two veterans was palpable, built on shared experiences on battlefields that most people would never know. Bradley watched this exchange with growing discomfort, realizing he was losing even more ground. "Look," Bradley tried again, his voice now laden with a defensive arrogance that poorly masked his embarrassment. "Maybe I acted rashly, but that doesn't change the fact that this is a military bar. Places like this exist so that people like us can relax without having to explain our jokes or our conversations to civilians." Diana smiled for the first time since the beer had been spilled on her blouse. It was not a pleasant smile. "You're right, Captain Morrison. This is a place for people like us." She emphasized the last words in a way that made Bradley realize he had fallen into a verbal trap. Thomas pulled out his phone and showed Bradley the screen. It was a Facebook page open on the captain's public profile. "Interesting how you define people like us," Thomas commented. "Especially considering your recent posts about maintaining high military standards and not lowering requirements to accommodate minorities." Bradley's face paled as he saw his own words displayed. Several recent posts criticized military inclusion policies, questioned the ability of women in combat, and suggested that lower standards were compromising military excellence. "Post from 3 days ago," Thomas continued, reading aloud, "The military is becoming too politically correct. We are compromising missions to conduct social experiments. Some people just aren't cut out to be on the front lines." Liked by 247 people, including several other members of your team. Diana picked up her own phone, typing quickly. "Captain Morrison, you have Instagram too, don't you?" At Bradley Morrison SAL. Verified, 15,000 followers. Bio that says, Elite Warrior, American Patriot, Defender of Excellence. Bradley reached for her phone, but Diana gracefully moved away. What are you doing? I'm doing what you did to me, Diana replied calmly, except I'm doing it with facts, not prejudice. She showed the screen to Thomas and a few other veterans who had gathered around. Stories posted last night after a few beers. Videos criticizing DEI hires in the military, mocking snowflakes who can't handle the real military, and suggesting that women in combat are just political theater. The circle of veterans around them had grown, and many now watched Bradley with a mixture of curiosity and growing disapproval. His own words were being used to reveal exactly the kind of person he was, not just to Diana, but to everyone present. That's out of context, Bradley protested, but his voice had lost all of its previous authority. You're twisting. I'm reading your own words verbatim, Diana interrupted him. Posted publicly, with your full name and military rank attached. Thomas shook his head in disgust. Captain, you weren't just disrespectful to a decorated veteran. You were disrespectful to the very values you swear to uphold. Colonel Richards, who had been observing the entire interaction in silence, finally spoke up. Captain Morrison, report to my office tomorrow at 8 o'clock. We need to discuss how your social media activities reflect on the values of our unit. The reality of the situation finally hit Bradley like a tsunami. Not only had he publicly humiliated an elite veteran, but his own online posts, which he had made thinking he was among ideological allies, were now being exposed to his superiors and colleagues. Diana put her phone away and stood up from the table. Captain Morrison, you wanted to know my code name. Now you know. You also said that places like this are for people like us to relax. You're right again. She paused, looking him straight in the eye. The difference is that when I relax, I don't need to put other people down to feel better about myself. When I relax, I don't need to post online about how superior I am to others who served the same country I served. The silence in the bar was absolute. Diana had turned what began as a simple personal humiliation into something much bigger. A public exposure of Bradley Morrison's character and values. Thomas approached Diana as she was preparing to leave. Master Chief, may I make a suggestion? Kevin, my nephew, is organizing a charity event for combat wounded veterans next month. I would be honored if you would consider attending. Diana nodded. Send me the details. I'd be happy to help. As she walked toward the door, her upright, dignified posture stood in stark contrast to Bradley, who remained slumped in his chair, surrounded by colleagues who now saw him in a completely different light. What Bradley Morrison didn't realize yet was that this night at the Warrior's Den wasn't the end of his humiliation, it was only the beginning. Because when you publicly disrespect someone who has dedicated their life to serving others, and your own words reveal who you truly are inside, the consequences have a peculiar way of spreading far beyond the four walls of a military bar. As Diana stepped out into the cool Norfolk night air, she already knew exactly what she would do next. And Bradley Morrison would soon discover that underestimating a ghost is a mistake that echoes much further and much longer than anyone could imagine. Bradley Morrison woke up the next morning with a hangover that had nothing to do with alcohol. His phone had been ringing incessantly since 6 a.m., and when he finally mustered the courage to check his notifications, he discovered that his life had imploded overnight. The first message was from Naval Command, Captain Morrison, report immediately for disciplinary investigation. Your activities on social media have violated naval directives on public conduct. The second was from his fiancée, Jennifer. Brad, I'm calling off the wedding. I saw the videos. I can't marry someone I don't recognize. The third was from his mother, Bradley James Morrison. Did I raise a monster? I am ashamed. But it was the fourth message that made him understand the true extent of his ruin. It was a link to a Navy Times article with the headline, SEAL Captain Humiliates Decorated Veteran. Viral videos expose discrimination in the military. The article wasn't just about the bar incident. It was a full investigation into Bradley Morrison, his online posts, his comments in private military groups, and testimonials from subordinates about his discriminatory behavior over the years. Someone had meticulously compiled years of digital evidence. Bradley rushed to his laptop, desperate to control the damage, but found that his social media accounts had been suspended due to violations of community guidelines. His prejudiced stories, which he thought were safe among friends, were now captured in screenshots circulating all over the internet. The phone rang. It was Admiral Peterson, Regional Commander. Morrison, you have two options: voluntary discharge with loss of benefits or public court-martial. You have 1 hour to decide. As Bradley tried to process the collapse of his career, a notification popped up on his phone. Thomas Mitchell had posted a video on Facebook that already had 100,000 views in 3 hours. Fellow veterans, Thomas spoke directly to the camera. Yesterday I witnessed something that made me reflect on who truly deserves to wear the uniform. Master Chief Diana Washington, known in classified operations as Ghost, saved the lives of my nephew and 12 other soldiers in Helmand. She did it because it was her duty, not because she expected recognition. Thomas paused, looking directly at the camera. Yesterday, an officer who has never seen real combat, who posts about maintaining standards on Instagram while demonstrating the worst possible standards, publicly humiliated this heroine. This isn't about politics or woke culture. This is about character. The video included clips of Bradley's own behavior at the bar, contrasted with testimonials from soldiers Diana had saved. The difference was devastating. Bradley then received a call he didn't expect. Diana Washington. Captain Morrison, her voice was calm, professional. I imagine you're having a difficult morning. You did this, Bradley whispered, his voice hoarse with despair. You orchestrated it all. I didn't have to orchestrate anything, Diana replied. You did it all yourself. Every post, every comment, every moment of arrogance was your choice. I just made sure your own words reached the right people. Bradley felt nausea wash over him. My career, my life. Your career is over because you used your position to promote discrimination. Your life is changing because people are finally seeing who you really are behind the uniform. This is revenge, Bradley accused, despair tinging his voice. No, Captain Morrison. Revenge would be destroying you for personal pleasure. This is responsibility. You represent military values that you clearly don't understand. Men and women have died defending the idea that all Americans deserve respect, regardless of color or gender. Diana paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. You spent years posting about military standards while personifying everything that is wrong with institutional prejudice. Now you are facing the real standards. Bradley tried one last desperate gambit. You can't prove I did anything illegal. Social media posts aren't crimes. You're right, Diana agreed. But you forgot that you violated at least 12 naval regulations on public conduct, discrimination, and misuse of military position to promote prejudice. Oh, and your comments about bending a few rules to keep weak soldiers in line in private groups? That can be interpreted as threatening subordinates. Bradley's blood ran cold. Those comments had been made in closed groups, conversations he believed to be private. How did you? Veterans protect each other, Captain Morrison. When you attack one of us, especially someone who has saved American lives, the community responds. And today, the entire community knows exactly who you are. At that moment, Bradley understood that he had not been defeated by personal revenge, but by something much greater. He had underestimated not only Diana, but an entire network of veterans who value honor over arrogance, service over status. His phone rang again. It was the family lawyer, informing him that Jennifer had returned the engagement ring and that her parents were re-evaluating the financial support they were giving her for her apartment. Diana continued, her voice maintaining the same professional calm. Captain Morrison, you will now have time to reflect on the difference between earning respect and demanding submission. Between leading by example and intimidating out of insecurity. What do you want from me? Bradley asked, his arrogance finally broken. Nothing. You've already given yourself exactly what you deserved. As Bradley contemplated the wreckage of his military career, his public reputation, and his personal relationships, one question echoed in his mind. How could a moment of arrogance have revealed such a devastating truth about who he really was? More importantly, was it possible to rebuild a life after discovering that his entire identity was based on prejudices he had never questioned, until he met someone who turned his own words into the most powerful weapon against him? 6 months later, Diana Washington walked through the halls of the Naval Hospital with her new badge, Director of Trauma and Emergency Medicine. Her promotion had been unanimous, supported by dozens of veterans who finally knew her true story of service. The combat trauma training program she developed was being implemented in military hospitals across the country. Her speech at the Congress on silent leadership, When Character Speaks Louder Than Medals had received a standing ovation and gone viral with over 5 million views. Thomas Mitchell found her in the cafeteria with good news. Diana, the charity event raised $2.3 million for wounded veterans. Kevin said it's the largest amount ever raised. Diana smiled, watching the recruits training in the courtyard through the window. How's the mentoring program for new officers going? Growing every week. 52 veterans have already volunteered to teach about leadership based on respect, not intimidation. Meanwhile, across town, Bradley Morrison was adjusting his night security uniform at a shopping mall. His dishonorable discharge from the Navy had made it impossible to find work in private security or any position requiring clearance. Jennifer had married a fellow doctor 3 months after their breakup. His parents, embarrassed by the national exposure, limited contact to polite Christmas cards. The apartment he shared with 2 roommates was a far cry from the privileged military life he had known. Every night, during her lonely rounds, Bradley reflected on that moment in the Warriors' Denver. How had a simple act of arrogance revealed something so ugly about her character that even she didn't recognize? Diana, on the other hand, found that her public exposure had opened doors she never imagined. Invitations to speak came in weekly. Universities offered visiting professor positions. Publishers competed for the rights to her autobiography. The difference, she said during an interview with the Navy Times, is not in never falling, but in how you choose to get up. And especially, in how you treat others when you have the power to hurt them or lift them up. The Warriors' Den had been transformed. Under new management, it implemented monthly training on diversity and inclusion. The Wall of Honor now included photos of veterans of all races and genders, with special emphasis on silent heroes like Diana. Thomas organized a special evening 6 months after the incident. Veterans from across the country came to share stories about leadership and character. Diana was the keynote speaker. Character, she said into the microphone, is not what you do when you're being watched. It's what you do when you think no one is watching. It's how you treat those who appear to have less power than you. In the audience, dozens of young officers absorbed her every word. Many were from the generation that had grown up watching Bradley Morrison's viral video, learning by negative example what not to do. True military leadership, Diana continued, does not come from intimidating subordinates or belittling civilians. It comes from lifting others up, protecting the vulnerable, and using your training to serve something greater than your own ego. When the lecture ended, the ovation lasted a full 5 minutes. Bradley, watching on the security monitors at his night job, finally understood the magnitude of what he had lost. Not just his career, but the chance to be the kind of leader who made a positive difference in the world. Diana had turned a moment of personal humiliation into a national lesson on character and leadership. Her revenge was not to destroy Bradley for her own pleasure, but to use her own story to raise standards across the military community. The best revenge, she discovered, was not to bring down those who had hurt her, but to rise so high that her light would inspire others to be better. Bradley Morrison tried to humiliate her for who she appeared to be, but ended up revealing exactly who he really was inside. If this story of overcoming adversity and justice has touched you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that true character always wins in the end.